Clara sat alone in her empty living room, the walls echoing with memories of laughter that no longer existed. Her wedding photos, once bright and full of promise, now felt like relics of a life that had slipped through her fingers. Divorce was never supposed to happen to her. She had always believed in love, in commitment, in the storybook life her parents had modelled. Yet here she was, just her, a quiet house, and the heavy weight of heartbreak. For months, Clara moved through life as though in a fog. Friends called, but she smiled politely and hung up before she could cry. She went to work, did her chores, and forced herself to eat, but the joy she had once felt in small things, sunlight on her face, the smell of fresh coffee, was gone. Each night, she stared at the ceiling, wondering where it had all gone wrong. She wasn't angry, she wasn't bitter, she was simply empty. One rainy afternoon, as Clara walked through the park near her apartment, she noticed a little girl struggling with her bicycle. Without thinking, she ran over and helped steady the bike. The girl's mother thanked her warmly, and Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months: connection. It was brief, but it reminded her that life still existed outside the walls of her pain. That evening, she poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window. She watched the rain fall, letting the sound fill the quiet spaces in her heart. And then, slowly, she whispered to herself, "I have to live again. Not for anyone else, but for me." From that moment, Clara made small choices that no one would notice, but that mattered profoundly to her. She started walking in the mornings, noticing the way the sunlight sparkled on wet leaves. She joined a local book club, listening more than speaking, but slowly allowing herself to laugh at clever jokes. She even bought herself flowers one Friday afternoon, just because. The days were not easy. There were nights when she cried so hard it hurt to breathe. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible. But every time she survived the night, every time she chose to show up for herself, Clara felt a tiny spark of strength. She began to realize something profound. Her life was not over. It had only changed. Months passed. One Saturday morning, Clara's friend invited her to a small gallery opening. Clara hesitated. Crowds made her anxious, and art had always reminded her of her ex. But she went anyway. Standing in the quiet hall, surrounded by paintings that told stories without words, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope that beauty still existed in the world. Hope that she, too, could create something new in her own life. Back at home that evening, Clara looked around her apartment. It was the same place she had cried in, raged in, and despaired in. But now she began to see it differently. Each corner of the room carried her story, yes, but also her survival. The living room wasn't just empty, it was open. Open for new possibilities, open for laughter, open for life. She poured herself another glass of water, this time with intention. She raised it to her lips, feeling the cool liquid flow down, and with it, a sense of peace. She was not just surviving anymore. She was learning to thrive, to love herself, to create a life that, while different from the one she had imagined, was still full of meaning, joy, and potential. Later that week, Clara sat at her desk and began to write not work emails, not lists of chores. She wrote letters to herself, letters of encouragement, of forgiveness, of hope. She wrote about the pain, yes, but also about the courage she found in facing it. By the time she set the pen down, she felt lighter. The heaviness of heartbreak had not disappeared, but it no longer defined her. As the sun set that evening, Clara stood by the window, gazing at the city skyline. She thought of the life she had left behind, the love she had lost, and the countless ways she had survived. And she smiled, a soft, quiet smile that came from deep inside. She was a woman who had endured, who had cried, who had faltered. But she had also stood up again, time and time again. And that strength, that resilience, was hers forever. Divorce had taken a chapter from her life, but it had not taken her story. She would write the next pages herself, with courage, grace, and a heart wide open. And every time she lifted a glass of water, every time she paused to care for herself, she reminded herself of a simple truth. You cannot pour into the world if your own cup is empty. Clara turned away from the window and walked into her kitchen, filling her glass once more. She raised it in a quiet toast to herself, to her life, to her survival, to the future that awaited her, not as a shadow of what she had lost, but as the woman she had become. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt free.